Right here, in this exact 10 by 10 patch of ground behind my garage, is where the whole system began. 3 years ago, this corner had no purpose at all. It was damp, shaded, full of tall weeds, and the only thing stored here was an old lawnmower that had practically been forgotten. Today, that same little corner brings in just over $5,000 a month on average. And I am not talking about one lucky month, one holiday rush, or one perfect sales week. I mean the honest average from the last 11 months of running this setup consistently. And here is what surprises most people. You cannot see it from the street. There is no big greenhouse, no loud equipment, no delivery trucks pulling in, and no sign announcing a backyard business. A neighbor could walk past this fence every morning and never realize that a small, productive, self-sustaining farm system is working quietly just a few feet away. In this video, I am going to walk you through exactly what fits inside this 10 by 10 space, what it costs to build, how the income is actually created, and where most beginners make their biggest mistake when they try to copy a setup like this. No empty passive income talk, no fantasy numbers, just the real layout, the real costs, and the practical details that make the system work. So stay with me, because the part most people misunderstand is not the part they usually worry about. Welcome to Farmyard Care, where we show that self-sufficiency does not always require 5 acres, a tractor, or a business degree. Sometimes it starts with one small corner of the yard that most people are already wasting. If you enjoy animal husbandry, backyard farming, and smart small space production, make sure to subscribe. Your support is what helps this channel keep growing. Now, let's step into the corner. Part 1. The small footprint illusion, why less is more. When most people hear the phrase backyard business, they immediately imagine a wide homestead, several acres of land, chickens running everywhere, and someone spending all day in boots and overalls. That picture is exactly why so many people never even start. It is not because they are lazy or uninterested. It is because they look at their small yard, their townhouse space, or one unused corner behind the house, and think, there is no way this could work for me. But after years of working with backyard livestock, small animal systems, and practical homestead setups, I can tell you this: that assumption is completely backwards. A small footprint is not always a weakness. In many cases, it is the advantage that makes the whole system possible. With a fenced 10 by 10 setup, you are not building a large barn. You are not trying to run a full commercial farm from your backyard. You are working with a compact, quiet, controlled structure that is easier to manage, easier to clean, and much easier to keep out of sight. You do not need the same level of infrastructure that a large livestock project would require. And because the system is tucked away behind the fence, it avoids the 2 things that ruin most backyard projects: attention from people who do not understand it, and complaints from neighbors who think livestock means noise, smell, and mess. The truth is, modern small-scale farming is not really about acreage anymore. It is about efficiency. A 4x4 raised bed can grow a surprising amount of vegetables when it is planned correctly. A spare room can become a low-tech mushroom production space, and a shaded backyard corner can become productive if you choose the right animals and the right supporting system. When I started, I was not trying to build a major business. I was simply trying to fix an ugly, useless patch of ground. It was too shaded for a normal garden, too damp from the gutter runoff, and too annoying to mow properly. So I started asking a practical question: what can actually thrive in a damp, shaded 10-foot space without demanding constant work every hour of the day? That research led me through old homesteading forums, backyard farming discussions, and older agricultural guides. And the same 2 answers kept appearing again and again: quail and worms. Not chickens, not rabbits. Quail and worms. Once I understood why those 2 work so well together, the idea of hidden backyard income suddenly made sense. Part 2. The silent superbird. Why quail beat chickens. So why quail? Why not chickens? Since chickens are what most people think of first. The answer is simple. The animal you choose determines almost everything about your setup. It determines how much space you need, how much noise you create, how much smell you have to manage, how neighbors react, how difficult the rules become, and how quickly the system begins producing. And this is where quail solve many of the problems that chickens often create. Let's start with space. A properly kept chicken needs several square feet of coop space, And that does not even include the outdoor run. Chickens also scratch, roam, disturb bedding, and require stronger fencing because they take up more room and attract more attention. Quail, especially Coturnix quail, need only a fraction of that space. In the area one chicken might require, you can house a small group of quail comfortably and humanely if the enclosure is designed correctly. Then there is noise. Anyone who has raised chickens knows they are not always quiet. A rooster is obvious, but even laying hens can be loud enough to irritate people nearby. In suburban areas, noise is often what triggers complaints long before anyone cares about the actual animal. Quail are different. A quail hen makes a soft, gentle sound, more like a light cricket chirp than a barnyard call. It does not carry across a neighborhood the way chicken noise can. A neighbor sitting on the other side of the fence may never realize the birds are there. From a legal and practical standpoint, that quiet nature matters. In many suburban codes, chickens are specifically regulated. Some areas restrict flock size, ban roosters, require permits, or require setbacks from property lines. Quail are often treated differently because they are commonly classified as game birds rather than standard backyard poultry. That does not mean you should ignore your local rules, but it does mean quail can be far easier to fit into a small residential setting than chickens. Now look at production. A healthy laying quail hen can produce close to an egg a day during strong laying periods, which is impressive for such a small bird. But the real advantage is speed. Chickens usually take 5 to 6 months before they begin laying. Coturnix quail can reach laying maturity in about 6 to 8 weeks. That means your system starts producing much sooner, and your flock can grow much faster than a chicken setup. For a small backyard space where every square foot matters, quail are one of the most efficient birds you can raise. Part 3. The worm magic underneath. The vermicomposting engine. Quail eggs are useful, valuable, and easy to sell in the right local market. But eggs alone from a small backyard flock are usually a side income, not the whole business. If you want a tiny yard to become a serious production system, you need a second engine working underneath the birds. That second engine is vermicomposting, raising composting worms directly below the quail. This is the part many backyard business videos skip because worm castings do not look exciting at first glance. They are not as photogenic as fresh eggs or cute birds. But from a practical farming standpoint, worm castings are one of the most valuable outputs a small space can produce. Your inputs are low cost or nearly free: manure, kitchen scraps, shredded cardboard, and organic waste. Your output is a premium soil amendment that gardeners, plant collectors, small nurseries, and local growers are often willing to pay for. When you compare this to other small farm ideas, the difference becomes clear. Specialty cut flowers can be profitable, but they require land, planting space, timing, irrigation, and months of growth. A backyard nursery can create extra income, but many plants take years before they reach a sellable size. Worms, on the other hand, reproduce naturally and keep processing organic material every day. If the system is balanced, they turn waste into finished castings on a continuous cycle. This is where the quail and worm system becomes powerful. The quail eat their feed and produce high nitrogen manure. In a normal backyard, manure can become a problem very quickly. It can smell, attract flies, build up under cages, and create extra labor because someone has to shovel it, move it, and manage it. But in this design, the manure drops through the mesh floor of the quail enclosure and moves straight toward the worm system below. The worms, supported by kitchen scraps and shredded cardboard, begin breaking that material down. They help reduce odor, process the waste, and turn it into rich, dark, nutrient-dense castings. Instead of treating manure as a problem, the system treats it as an ingredient. That is the key. You are not just raising birds, and you are not just composting. You are connecting both systems, so the waste from one becomes the product of the other. In the same 10 by 10 footprint, a material that would normally be messy becomes something people are willing to buy. Part 4. The physical architecture. How it fits together. Now let's look at how this 10 by 10 corner is actually arranged, because the physical design is what turns quail keeping and worm composting from two separate hobbies into one connected production system. Along the back fence line sits the raised quail enclosure. The main structure is about 6 feet long, 3 feet deep, and 3 feet tall, set on sturdy wooden legs roughly 2 feet above the ground. Raising the enclosure is not just for convenience. It is one of the most important design choices in the whole setup. First, it keeps the quail away from ground-level dampness. Quail can be hardy birds, but they do not do well in cold, wet bedding. Damp conditions can increase the risk of respiratory problems, stress, and poor performance. By keeping the birds elevated, the enclosure stays drier and easier to manage. Second, the raised design allows the droppings and loose bedding to fall through the wire mesh floor into the collection area below. That matters because manure handling is where many backyard systems fail. If cleaning becomes heavy, smelly, and unpleasant, people stop doing it consistently. This design reduces that problem from the beginning. Under the hutch, the collection tray is built with a gentle slope and lined with durable plastic sheeting. That slope allows manure and used bedding to move naturally toward the front, where the worm bins are positioned. Instead of scraping, scooping, and carrying buckets every day, gravity does part of the work. In a small livestock setup, simple labor-saving design like this can make the difference between a system you maintain and a system you abandon. Below the raised structure are 4 stacked worm bins, each about 2 feet wide and 3 feet long. I prefer a flow-through style system rather than basic plastic storage totes, because it allows the worms to work continuously. Fresh food and bedding are added from the top. The worms naturally move upward toward the new material, while the finished castings settle below. When it is time to harvest, the castings can be removed from the bottom through a mesh screen without tearing apart the whole colony or disturbing the active worms. To one side of the hutch is a small covered work area with a folding wooden table. This is the processing station. It is where eggs are cleaned, sorted, and packed into cartons, and where finished worm castings are bagged and labeled for pickup. Nothing about it needs to look flashy. The only small sign of activity is a simple board listing what is available locally. Everything stays inside the 10 by 10 footprint: the raised quail enclosure, the worm bins, the processing table, and enough walking space to reach every part for feeding, cleaning, checking birds, harvesting eggs, and collecting castings. That is why the layout works. It is compact but not cramped. Every piece has a purpose, and every part supports the next. Part 5, the financials. $320 startup breakdown. Now let's talk about the second reason many people never start a small backyard business. They believe it takes thousands of dollars, a bank loan, expensive equipment, or some complicated business setup before the first dollar can ever come in. When I built this system, my real out-of-pocket startup cost was exactly $320. I kept every receipt because I knew most people would hear that number and think it was too low to be true. But when you build carefully, start small, and focus only on what the animals and worms actually need, the cost stays surprisingly manageable. The raised quail enclosure was the biggest expense. I built it with new lumber and half-inch hardware cloth, and that came to $140. If you already have access to reclaimed boards, old pallets, leftover framing lumber, or other safe scrap material, this part can be built for much less. With careful sourcing, you could bring the enclosure cost under $60. The worm bins and starter worm population came next. I spent $70 on that side of the system. That included 1 pound of active red wiggler starter worms delivered to my door, plus a few basic plastic storage bins. I drilled ventilation holes into them and used them as my first simple worm bins before later upgrading to a more professional flow-through design. Then came the birds. I started with 20 Coturnix quail chicks. For small backyard production, Coturnix quail are one of the best choices because they are calm, hardy, compact, and dependable layers when they are managed correctly. At $3 per chick, the total cost for the birds was $60. Feed, bedding, and basic supplies made up the final part. Pine shavings for bedding and enough feed to get through the first month cost about $50. So the math is simple. $140 for the enclosure, $70 for the worm setup, $60 for the birds, and $50 for feed and bedding. Add it together, and the total comes to exactly $320. Now compare that with many other small business ideas. A laser cutting business can require $30,000 to $45,000 in equipment. A 3D printing farm can easily sit somewhere between $4,100 and $15,200 before it becomes serious. But with the price of 1 month of groceries, you can build a small productive asset that has the potential to create recurring monthly income from your own backyard. Part 6. The scaling math. From $50 to $5,000 a month. I know the question that comes up right away. How does a $320 setup turn into $5,000 a month? So let's walk through the numbers slowly and clearly. At the beginning, with 20 mature laying hens, you can usually expect around 15 to 18 eggs a day when the birds are healthy and the environment is managed well. Quail eggs are not ordinary eggs in the local market. They are a premium niche product. Restaurants use them for small gourmet dishes and garnishes, and home cooks like them for pickling, specialty meals, and unique recipes. In many local markets, quail eggs can sell for 50 cents to $1 per egg. If we use a conservative price of 60 cents per egg, 20 birds can bring in around $270 a month. That is enough to cover feed and create a useful side income, but by itself, it is not a full business. The real growth happened in two directions during the first year. First, I expanded the quail flock from 20 birds to just under 100. Because the enclosure was designed vertically, I did not have to increase the footprint of the whole setup. I simply added another tier to the hutch, which increased capacity while keeping everything inside the same 10 by 10 space. With 100 laying quail hens, even after allowing for natural molting cycles and normal production dips, the flock can average around 60 eggs a day. At 60 cents per egg, that gives about $1,080 a month from eggs alone. Second, and this is where the bigger jump happens, is the worm castings. Finished, high-quality organic worm castings can sell locally to gardeners, plant growers, and small boutique nurseries for $12 to $20 per 5-gallon bucket. Once the flock reached 100 birds, the amount of manure increased, and that gave the worms more material to process. Over time, the worm population multiplied naturally into the tens of thousands. A well-managed system using manure from 100 quail, along with local kitchen scraps and shredded cardboard, can produce an average of 180 5-gallon buckets of finished castings per month. Selling those buckets at an average price of $18 each brings in just over $3,200 a month. Then there is one smaller income stream that I did not expect at first: selling starter worm cultures to other backyard growers who want to begin their own compost piles or worm bins. When you add that to the egg sales and the castings, the system reaches that $5,000 a month range. It did not happen in the first week, and it did not happen by accident. It took about 15 months of steady, step-by-step scaling, but once the structure, flock, worm population, and customer base were all working together, the numbers became consistent, predictable, and repeatable. Part 7. Legality and Logistics. Keeping it low-key. Now let's deal with the question many people are probably thinking about. Is this actually legal? The honest answer is that rules can vary a lot depending on your country, state, city, county, and even your neighborhood. Before you build anything, you need to check your local ordinances. That is not the exciting part of farming, but it is one of the most important parts if you want your system to last. Here is how to approach it in a practical way. First, many municipal codes are written specifically around poultry, such as chickens, ducks, and turkeys. In some places, those animals are restricted, limited by flock size, or tied to permit requirements. But game birds like quail are often treated differently, and some local codes do not mention them at all. When I started, I called my local zoning office directly. I did not ask a vague question like, "Can I farm in my backyard?" I asked clearly whether keeping a small number of game birds for personal use and small-scale local sales was allowed on a residential lot. Whenever possible, get the answer in writing or by email. Second, pay close attention to how you sell. Direct-to-consumer sales are usually the simplest path. Selling eggs directly to friends, neighbors, and local contacts may fall under small flock rules, cottage food exemptions, or similar low-level local allowances. But if you start selling to supermarkets, running paid public advertisements, or trying to enter a larger commercial supply chain, you may trigger washing, grading, packaging, and licensing rules. That is why keeping sales local and direct makes the system much easier to manage. Third, worm castings are different from eggs because they are a soil amendment, not a food product. That usually means fewer hurdles and less regulatory complexity. This is one reason the worm casting side became such an important part of the business as it grew. It allowed the income to increase without creating the same level of regulation that can come with food sales. The rule I follow is simple. Keep the operation clean, quiet, low-key, and professional. Do not put a giant sign in the front yard. Do not create smell, noise, or clutter. Do not give neighbors a reason to complain. A silent, odor-controlled, well-managed system is your best protection. In backyard livestock, the cleaner and calmer your setup is, the longer it can keep working without problems. Part 8. A day in the life. 20 minutes of daily rhythm. A lot of people assume that if a backyard system can bring in $5,000 a month, it must take every hour of the day to run. But once the physical setup is built properly, the daily routine is surprisingly simple. The key is that the system has to be designed for low labor from the beginning. A normal day starts with about 10 minutes at the quail enclosure. I top off the gravity feeders, check the automatic water cups, and take a careful look at the birds. This quick inspection matters. Quail are prey animals, and like many prey animals, they can hide illness very well. If you do not look closely every day, a weak bird can decline before you notice anything is wrong. I check their movement, posture, eyes, feathers, and general behavior. While I am there, I slide out the egg collection tray, which only takes a couple of minutes. After that, I spend about 5 minutes at the worm bins. I check the moisture by hand because worms need the right balance. The bedding should feel like a wrung-out sponge, damp but not dripping wet. If a tray needs feeding, I add shredded wet cardboard or a bucket of vegetable scraps from the kitchen. The goal is to keep the worms active without overfeeding and creating sour, wet conditions. In the evening, I do a quick 5-minute safety check. I make sure the waterers are still flowing, and I check the latch on the hutch. This step is not optional. Quail are small, and predators know it. Raccoons, opossums, hawks, and other animals will take advantage of even a small gap. A strong latch and a secure enclosure are part of responsible daily care. Once a week, I set aside about an hour and a half for deeper maintenance. That includes cleaning the hutch floor, harvesting finished castings from the bottom of the flow-through worm bins, checking the bedding condition, and packing the week's orders. When you add it up, the daily work is about 20 to 30 minutes, plus one longer session on the weekend. That comes to less than 4 hours of physical labor in a typical week, and the customer side did not require expensive marketing. My first buyers came from one simple, honest post on a local neighborhood app. I wrote that I had fresh backyard quail eggs and organic worm castings available for local pickup. On the first day, 5 people replied. 2 of those people are still weekly customers 3 years later. After that, word of mouth carried the business forward. I also brought small sample bags of worm castings to a local gardening club, and that helped people see the quality for themselves. Redefining self-sufficiency. At the end of the day, the part of this system that matters most to me is not only the $5,000 monthly income. The deeper value is the self-sufficiency it creates. We live in a world where supply chains can break, food prices can rise, and many people feel completely dependent on large systems they cannot control. But in this small 10 by 10 corner, I built a tiny, resilient ecosystem. Kitchen scraps and quail manure feed the worms. The worms produce rich organic castings. Those castings improve soil and help grow food. And the quail provide clean, steady protein through their eggs. That is the beauty of a well-designed backyard system. It does not have to be huge to be meaningful. You do not need to leave society, buy 100 acres, or empty your savings account to begin building more security and independence. You can start with one wasted corner of the yard, a few $100s, and a simple plan. Start with 20 birds and 1 worm bin. Learn the rhythm. See if you enjoy the daily care. Let the system begin paying for itself, and only scale when you understand how each part works. Thank you so much for watching Farmyard Care. If this video inspired you, share it with someone who has an empty corner of their yard and no idea what it could become. Subscribe, leave your questions in the comments, and I will see you in the next breakdown. Happy farming!